But before we dive into the disturbing tales of the night, let me ask you, do you have the courage to stay until the end? Most viewers don't subscribe to the channel, perhaps out of oversight, or perhaps because, after hearing these stories, they never slept the same way again. If you think you can handle it, click subscribe now. My uncle, now called Frank Dawson, worked in construction in Arizona on a project near the border with New Mexico. He took long trips every day, returning home late at night. The road he took was deserted, cutting through the desert with miles of nothing but sand and cacti. One of those nights, he was particularly tired. It was past 11 p.m. when he took the road home, driving alone as usual. The only illumination came from his truck's headlights and a solitary lamppost at the entrance of a dirt road, one of those secondary access roads that almost no one uses. That's where he saw her. A woman, dressed in simple clothes and a grey shawl, was walking slowly, accompanied by a little girl. The little girl was wearing a light pink dress and walking beside the woman, but not holding hands, which seemed strange. Frank slowed down, feeling a tightness in his chest. The woman reminded him of his mother, which gave him a sense of familiarity that he couldn't ignore. He stopped the truck and rolled down the window. "Ma'am, it's late to be walking alone out here. Would you like a ride?" The woman hesitated, looking at him with suspicion. Her face was pale, and her eyes seemed to analyze every detail of Frank. "If you want, you can sit in the back. The front is full of things." After a few seconds of silence, the woman nodded and got into the vehicle. It was only then that Frank realized something disturbing. The little girl didn't come in with her. His heart raced. He was sure he had seen the girl, but when he looked in the rearview mirror, the little girl was no longer there. "Ma'am, isn't the little girl coming?" The woman took a long time to answer, staring at the window as if she hadn't even heard him. Then she murmured, "Don't worry, she's never alone." Frank felt a chill down his spine. The rest of the trip continued in silence. He tried to make conversation, ask where she came from, but the woman seemed distracted, staring into the darkness outside. After a few minutes, she finally spoke. "You can drop me off there. It's close." Frank looked where she was pointing. It was another dirt road leading off the main highway and plunging into the absolute darkness of the desert. There were no houses, no lights, nothing nearby. "Are you sure? I can take you to the city." She shook her head. "Thank you. God bless you." The woman opened the door and got out. Frank watched as she walked into the darkness, and then he saw her again. The little girl was there, standing beside the woman. He was sure she hadn't been in the truck. He felt a lump in his throat as the two disappeared down the deserted road. Frank accelerated and drove away as fast as he could. The next day, he decided to ask about that road. At a gas station in town, he mentioned the story to an old local resident. The man frowned. "You saw a lady and a little girl?" Frank nodded. The old man took a deep breath before saying, "Man, there's nothing there. That road leads to the Valley of the Lost. They say that many years ago, a woman and her daughter tried to cross the desert and never made it to the city. They got lost in the darkness, and to this day, they walk those roads, trying to find their way back." Frank didn't know what to say. He never took that road at night again. And sometimes, when he passes that old lamppost, he swears he still sees someone's silhouette waiting for a ride. My father, William Carter, spent over 30 years on the road as a truck driver in the United States. He knew all kinds of highways, cutting through deserts, mountains, and endless roads. During those decades, he saw it all: accidents, sudden storms, even bandits who tried to ambush trucks at night. But nothing marked him as much as what happened on that trip to Texas in December 1998. It was supposed to be a quiet route, taking a load to a town near the Mexican border. Since it was the holiday season, my younger brother Daniel, who was only 9 years old, asked to go with him. My father hesitated at first, but eventually gave in. The outbound trip went smoothly, but on the way back, they were delayed. The sun had already set, and the road was completely deserted. Daniel was asleep in the passenger seat, covered by a jacket, while my father kept his eyes fixed on the highway. Until my brother woke up suddenly. He stirred restlessly, rubbing his eyes, and stared at the side rearview mirror. "Dad," he whispered. My father was surprised by his tone of voice. "What's wrong, son?" Daniel kept looking in the mirror, his expression becoming tense. "There's a woman out there." That sentence chilled my father to the bone. He took a quick glance in the rearview mirror, but saw nothing. "What woman?" My brother was silent for a few seconds and then murmured, "She's appearing." That made my father's heart race. He looked in the rearview mirror again, and for a second he was sure he saw something moving. Not a car, not an animal, something tall, dark, with long hair, walking along the shoulder of the road. But when he blinked, there was nothing there anymore. "Go to sleep, Daniel," said my father, trying to stay calm. The boy didn't answer. He just cowered in the seat, clutching his seatbelt as if something could pull him out of there. For a while, everything remained silent. But then the radio crackled, a sound of loud static as if something was trying to get on the frequency. And amidst the static came a subtle but disturbing sound. A female voice, low, distorted, calling my father's name. "William!" He turned off the radio right away. He stepped on the gas, determined to get out of that stretch of road as quickly as possible. In the horizon, he finally spotted a gas station and decided to stop to breathe and check the load. But before entering the gas station's yard, something unexpected happened. A dog, which was at the entrance, began to howl and bark uncontrollably towards the truck. His owner, a young gas station employee, tried to hold him back, but the animal seemed terrified. The young man approached and shouted to my father, "Sir, don't stop here!" My father frowned. "What?" The young man climbed onto the truck's step and whispered almost desperately, "She's with you." That was enough. My father took off from there without hesitating, accelerating as if his life depended on it. Daniel, pale, was shaking beside him. He didn't ask anything. He didn't need to. They only stopped when they finally saw the lights of the city. When they arrived at the base, my father got out of the truck without saying a word. But then he saw something that made his blood run cold. On the back of the truck, there were marks of ashes, scattered as if something burned had been there. No one could explain it. He never took Daniel truck driving again, and my brother never spoke of that woman again. But to this day, my father says that when he passes that stretch of road, he has the feeling that someone is still looking in the rearview mirror. This happened a few years ago when I took my grandmother back to the small town where she was born, in Montana. She hadn't visited the place in decades, since my father, her only son, passed away. I always thought she would never go back, but a phone call changed everything. We received the news that Arthur Wallace, an old friend of hers, had passed away. Without hesitation, she decided she had to be at the wake. We hit the road that same day. The town was in the middle of the mountains, and the way there wasn't easy. Narrow roads, dangerous curves, and long stretches with no cell signal. Besides, stories about robberies in that region were common. Many said that groups would come down from the hills to ambush drivers, so those who knew the route well avoided traveling at night. But there we were, stuck in the afternoon traffic and watching the sun set quickly. The first sign that something was wrong came when the car started to lose stability. On a curve on a dirt road, the steering wheel became heavy, the engine started to sputter, and when we finally stopped, I saw the problem. A completely flat tire. My grandmother didn't say a word. She just clasped her hands and started to pray. That bothered me. I was there, trying to think of a solution while she was just muttering prayers. But before I could argue, a subtle sound made my heart race. The rumble of an engine coming from the road above. A black pickup truck appeared on the curve. It stopped in the middle of the road with no sign of who was driving. The windows were completely tinted. And then, nothing. It just stood there, immobile, watching. My heart was beating so hard it hurt. They didn't try to offer help. They didn't get out of the car. They just stared at us. Or at least that's what it seemed like. Time passed slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. And then, without warning, the car accelerated and disappeared back to where it came from. I froze. I looked at my grandmother, expecting some reaction, some explanation, but she kept praying. That's when I realized something was wrong. I knew my grandmother. She was stubborn, talkative, always had something to say. But now she wasn't looking at me. Her eyes were fixed on the road, as if she was waiting for something to return. Before I could ask, another car appeared on the curve. This time a small old blue sedan. It stopped behind us, and a tall, thin man got out of the driver's seat. He walked slowly towards us. "Need any help?" His tone was calm, but cautious. This time I didn't feel fear. I nodded, but I was still too nervous to trust him completely. He opened the trunk, took out some tools, and started changing the tire quickly without saying much. That's when I noticed that my grandmother was staring at him. Not with distrust, but as if she recognized him. Then the man looked at her. His eyes widened. He smiled in disbelief. "It can't be. Are you Charlie's mother?" Charlie was my father. My grandmother just nodded without saying anything. The man sighed, wiping his greasy hands. "I was a friend of Charlie's many years ago. I shouldn't be here today." He looked at the road. I was in a neighboring town, but for some reason I felt I should go back earlier. I think it was fate. My stomach churned. I didn't know if I believed in fate. But if that guy hadn't shown up, I don't know what would have happened. When we finished, he offered to follow us to the town, just to make sure we arrived safely. My grandmother kissed a small St. Christopher amulet that she had been holding the whole time. The saint of travelers. Since then, I always carry a St. Christopher with me when I travel. I don't know if that was coincidence, luck, or something bigger. But I know one thing, that pickup truck wasn't there to help. And something or someone made that man appear before it was too late. This happened exactly 2.5 years ago, when my brother and I took a road trip to Flagstaff, Arizona. He was driving, and I was in the passenger seat. At the time, I didn't have a license yet, so my job was to keep him company and prevent him from dying of boredom. Our destination was the state capital. He needed to take care of some college paperwork, something unimportant, but that couldn't wait. The trip there was uneventful. The sun was strong, the road empty. Everything seemed normal. The return trip was also without problems, until we reached that hill. It was a sloping stretch, not very steep, but enough to put a little more strain on the engine. That's when things started to go wrong. First, the music stopped out of nowhere, then the engine died, and suddenly the car shut down completely. All the lights went out, no electrical signal, nothing responded. "Damn it," my brother muttered, turning the key frantically. But the car wouldn't start, and the worst part, it was starting to roll backwards down the hill. He slammed on the brakes. Nothing. The car continued to roll back. It was only when he pulled the handbrake that we finally managed to stop. We stayed there, stopped in the middle of the road, trying to understand what was happening. I got out of the car, feeling my stomach churn. I was nauseous, a little dizzy, as if something was wrong. That's when my brother saw it first. "What's that?" I followed his gaze and saw it. A few meters from us, there was a pile of dirt that didn't match the rest of the environment. It was recent. The earth looked disturbed, hastily covered with dry leaves. A chill went up my spine. My brother cautiously approached and without thinking much pushed some of the leaves with the tip of his shoe. That was enough. Underneath the thin layer of earth, there was a hand, pale, small, immobile. My brother recoiled so quickly that he almost fell. Oh my God! I could barely breathe. Someone was buried there. The feeling of nausea and anguish became unbearable. We got back into the car as quickly as possible. He turned the key one last time. The car started instantly. The lights came back on. The radio turned back on as if nothing had happened, and without looking back, we accelerated down the hill. We drove non-stop until we reached the city. Only when we found a safe place to park did my brother finally pick up the phone and call the police. He gave the exact location, mentioning the pile of dirt and the emergency reflective triangle that he left on the side of the road. It didn't matter if they could track the call. It didn't matter if they would ask questions. We just wanted to make sure someone found that person. In the following days, we waited for news, but nothing appeared in the newspapers, on TV, or on the internet. No reports of bodies found, no investigations announced. It was as if it had never existed. Many people told us it was just a coincidence, that the car failed by chance, that we stopped by bad luck, but I don't believe that. The car had never failed before, and it has never failed since. Something led us to that place that night, made us stop, made us see, made us know that someone was there. And although I'll never understand exactly what happened, I know one thing. That person was no longer alone, and to this day, every night I pray for her, without fail.